costs will only be covered if he chooses out of the various courses of action which seem open to him, that one which maximizes his profits. To cover costs and to maximize profit are essentially two ways of expressing the same phenomenon. It is easy to see why, holding this view, I analyzed the case of Sturgis against Bridgman in the way I did. It also illustrates the importance of being at a school at which you learn useful ideas, such as in this case, opportunity costs. However, although the economics department of the University of Chicago is among the best in the world, economists in that department did not see the situation in the same way that I did. They objected to my analysis in the passage dealing with the case of Sturgis against Bridgman, and indeed wanted me to delete it from my article on the FCC. However, I held my ground, and the passage remained in the article as published. I never really understood what the objection to my argument was. I think, but I cannot be sure of this, that these Chicago economists thought that if you possessed a right to do something, your costs would be lower than if you did not possess the right and had to purchase it. In this case, you had to make a payment that would be unnecessary if you possessed the rights. What they ignored, if my surmise about them is correct, is that if you do not use these rights, you could sell them, so that using them yourself costs you what they would have fetched on the market. The cost was the same whether you possess the right or not. This result is, of course, dependent on ignoring transaction costs, but that's quite usual in price theory. Some months after my FCC paper was published, with the error in it, I was invited by Stigler to give a paper at the Industrial Organization workshop. I accepted on condition that I could also have a discussion of my error. A meeting was arranged which took place at Aaron Director's home with about 20 Chicago economists present. Aaron Director, George Stigler, Milton Friedman, and others. I have only the haziest idea of what happened. This discussion was hot and heavy and lasted about 2 hours, with Milton Friedman the most active in the discussion. In the end, it was agreed that I was right. The effect on the participants, or at any rate most of them, and certainly on George Stigler, was dramatic. Stephen Chung, in his piece on me in the New Palgrave Dictionary of Economics, says that, according to McGee, who was present, and now I quote, "As the delegates left Aaron Director's house in a state of shock, they murmured to themselves that they had witnessed intellectual history." End of quote. I did not share this feeling. I could not understand why a statement, the equivalent of 2 + 2 = 4, should be treated on a par with E = mc squared. As I've said, I have no clear recollection of the discussion. What I do seem to remember as a turning point was when Haber said, if you cannot show that the marginal cost schedule changes, he can run right through. Stigler wrote an account of the discussion in his memoir of an unregulated economist. But I do not think it is entirely accurate. The tale of the vote before and after the discussion is pure fiction, although I don't doubt that had there been a vote, it would have come out as he described. His account of how I argued also does not strike me as being correct. It's just not my style. However, his statement that I used the example of the straying cattle damaging the crops of a neighbouring farmer is undoubtedly correct. I suspect that my argument at Aaron Director's home was much the same as that to be found in the first few pages of the problem of social cost. After the meeting, I was asked to write up my arguments for the Journal of Law and Economics, and that was how the problem of social costs came to be written. In that article, I didn't confine myself to what I'd said at the meeting. I illustrated the nature of the problem by reference to English nuisance cases. I showed that the conclusion that puzzled the Chicago economists was also dependent on the assumption of zero transaction costs, although they are likely, in fact, to be quite large. I discussed what the results were likely to be if you included transaction costs. I discussed the delimitation of property rights, and I ended the article with a discussion of Pigue's views, which have been largely adopted by the economics profession, and I showed that they were erroneous. The article was a great success. It helped to create the modern subject of law and economics. It has been cited more than any other article in the modern economics literature. However, much of this attention does not relate to what I said in that article, but to something called the Coase Theorem. This was invented by George Stigler and stated that under perfect competition, private and social costs will be equal. Coase's reformulation comes closer to what people usually have in mind when they refer to the Coase Theorem. The initial allocation of legal entitlements does not matter from an efficiency perspective so long as the transaction costs of exchange are nil. I've never been enthusiastic about Stigler's Coase Theorem, and you've got to be careful of giving other people's names to propositions. I don't like the concept of perfect competition, nor the assumption of zero transaction costs. To make these assumptions is to have a discussion about a world that does not exist, probably indeed one that could not exist. Of course, economists who are used to doing this were able to engage in this discussion of the Coase Theorem with enthusiasm. Of course, in making one's argument, it's quite all right to simplify, but this has to be done sensibly. In discussing the trajectory of a bullet fired from a rifle, it's no doubt reasonable to neglect the effect of gravity. But to make the assumption that gravity did not operate anywhere would mean that you don't have a bullet, a rifle, or indeed anything else. And that's what tended to happen in the whole discussion of the Coase Theorem. People didn't say, oh, we're neglecting the effect of transaction costs in this particular transaction. They said, in a world of zero transaction costs, which is, as I say, a world that couldn't exist. Looking back, it might have been better if in my FCC article I hadn't been influenced by my courses in law at LSE and had not discussed Sturgis against Bridgman. I could have confined myself to what I said about a newly discovered cave